Okay guys, so in this video I'm gonna show you how to edit a message, or rather we will look at how I made that work in our application. So here we are in the general channel and I'm connected on two different hosts or two different users, so Foo and Bar. And if Foo decides to click this little button now, we will see a little drop down like this where I can delete or edit the message. We haven't implemented delete yet, but just for now we click delete and now we get this little section here where we can change our message and say Foo Bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then just hit enter, and that's going to change our message. And if we go over to bar, we'll see that the message actually updated in real time. Now I can of course also just cancel, and I can also just hit save changes without saving anything, and it's still gonna work as expected. And bar can do it backwards, of course, like I can, well, back to the original person, like Foo can send a message to Bar, or Bar can change a message. I actually see that my connection was not updated here. Sorry about that. And if I do that again, do some changes, we'll see that yeah, it actually works. So, anywho, this is the feature. So let's have a look at the code. There we are, a bunch of stuff here. So let's look at our application first and foremost. So we've opened up another socket event, which is going to be update message, which is just going to take a message ID. And then when we have that message ID, we're simply going to go and get the message view that is corresponding to this message ID. And then we are going to the channel ID that this message is found in, simply emit this message so that, you know, when we actually want to do a real-time update, as we saw earlier. Like I update the message in my chat client, and then I want that message to be directly updated on all the people who are in my channels, like in their clients as well. And that's what's happening here. Our message service has gotten a few new methods, so get message view, and update message. And update message is simply going to take in a user ID, a message ID, and the text, and we're simply going to find the message that corresponds to this ID and this user. We're going to update the text, and then we're going to save it, and then we're simply going to construct here, using with the user ID, a message view, and just send that right back to the client. Easy peasy. Then we have getting a message view, which is also fairly simple. Like we're simply going to get a message, and then we're going to get the user that corresponds to that message, and then we're going to construct a view from it. And the same when we get message is just, hey, get this specific message. That's it, really. So for our socket channels, we have a new event, which is called incoming update message. And basically, so when I get a message in my client, which is what's happening when somebody is sending a message to me, like updating a message on their end, and there's going to be a message that comes to me, as we saw earlier. All that's going to happen is that I'm going to wrap this incoming message in a message model, and then I'm going to check if the channel that I am currently on is the channel that this message is going to be updating in. If it is, then I'm going to dispatch incoming update message to my to my store, and that's going to actually then fire up all the logic that re-renders the page and shows this new message. But otherwise, I'm not going to do anything. And then we have the chat component, which has started to go pretty big. We might want to consider refactoring this in the future, but for now it's going to be fine. So here we have a incoming update like message event that we are going to look at in just a moment. And then we have a new network call, update message, and there's a new component called edit text and one called message menu. And then we grab the message, and then we have basically update message here. As a chat action thread has already has been added in here as well, but we'll look at that later. It's not so important for this specific feature. So we see that we have an edit message function, close message menu, set edit message, delete message, cancel edit, and save update message. Now there's a bunch of stuff that's going to go on here. So I think that we're probably going to just try to walk through this as actually let's start by just looking at the list item, what happens if you click things, because this is going to get a little bit, well, quite a lot of things have happened here. Let's see if I can structure this in a nicer way. Let's have a look here. So basically the chat list item has gotten a few updates here, as you can see. So what's happening here is that this is like each of the list items in here. So each of these items is represented here. So now we actually have a message ID that is connected to this list item, as you can see. And I've done a few, like, just restructure this a little bit with some updates to the actual HTML. And the reason for that is because now I actually need to be able to grab the text area. As you can see earlier, we just had some plain text here. And now I actually need to be able to access the specific element, or the specific element that holds that text, because in order for us to support the re-rendering of this component, because what happens when I do this, when I click edit message, you can see here that this text area, this just plain text element, is now switched out for a text area, which is supposed to be editable. And I also have this part here, which is, you know, giving me the ability to cancel and have actions and all that good stuff. And that is actually happening like here. This is this new component that we saw earlier, edit text. So basically what happens is that we will grab the text element you saw and replace it with this element. We'll look at that logic in just a moment, but let's just walk through this. So basically it's just a text area that is going to fire edit message whenever there's a key up event. And then, oh, well, I can just scroll through so you can see the whole HTML there. And then the buttons have cancel edit and save update message, like, and they're both on the chat. So we will look at those methods and what they actually do. So when I cancel, I just go back to, as you see here, like, it's fairly straightforward when we look at it here. So I click cancel, hey, it fires this cancel edit, or I can hit save changes and it's going to fire the save update message, and that's the whole story basically. And then we have the edit message function there as well. We can also just look very quickly at the message menu because it's fairly simple as well. Like, all it's going to do is that it's going to have a render elements function, and then that basically is the thing that renders out the list items, set edit message and delete message, which is well, it's these items here basically. But since I don't have anything on that, it's just going to say, you know, delete message. And the other one, as you saw earlier, just opens edit mode. But I also have this conditional that's going to check whether or not I should render these elements. And the reason for that is because, hey, I'm logged in as foo. But I also have this little thing here for bar. But if I click that, hey, there's nothing there because I don't, you know, currently the features we have are edit and delete. And if we had more features, we would probably have them in this list. But I'm not supposed to be able to edit and delete, you know, another user's message. I hope that makes sense. So that's why this is kind of here to begin with. So now we have a little bit of a walkthrough of all of this. So let's just go back to chat and go through all of this logic here, because as we can see here, there's quite a lot of it. So when a user hits save update message, what's going to happen is that we are going to query for the text area. We're actually going, because remember, I have gotten to the point where I click this, and I click this, and now I have this text area. So we have a selector for grabbing the text area. And then we want to go and grab the current state, because we're going to we set a state like where with the key of the currently edited event, and we grab the ID, or not the event, the message. We grab the message ID. We grab the incoming. We go and update the message that we have, which is just going to be the message ID, the element, and its value. We just send the updated text, and that's going to give us the updated message. We wrap that in a client-side message model, and then we simply dispatch saying that, hey, we have updated this message. And then we on the socket emit that this message was now updated, and then we call cancel edit. The reason why we call cancel edit is because in cancel edit we have all of the resetting logic. So when we can either call cancel edit from the button, which is what we saw earlier. When we click cancel, we actually just click cancel and we go back to the previous state. But we also use it here to just go back to just rendering everything as it was before we clicked edit mode. So basically what's going to happen here is that we are going to grab this selector, which is just going to be like this element, and then we're going to grab the message once again that we have edited, or that was edited, it was under edit. We're going to create a new list item component with the correct key and the current message. Then we're going to create a node from that, and then we're going to grab basically the text element. As we saw earlier, this is the element where the actual text is living. And then we are going to replace this text element with the current element. That's basically it. We're going to just overwrite this entire edit text area with this, because remember, we are, when we've done this entire area now needs to be switched out for this, and that's exactly what's happening. We're grabbing that entire area here, and then we're simply replacing it here. We're simply just creating a new list item, and then we're just popping it in there. And then we're going to set a property which is called edit message height, sorry, which is, we watched through this before, where basically being able to set different heights on like the text area like this. We have one for just doing it for the message height, but now we need to have two of them because we have two different windows. This is one text area, and this is the other text area. And I mean, I should be able to do this here as well to a certain degree. I can just keep on going here, as you can see. And yeah, so we want to be able to support both, and we can't use the same variable because, hey, I don't want one window's height to affect the other, well, not window, the one text area should, the height of one text area should not affect another text area. I hope that makes sense. And then we have set edit message, which is basically going to be updating, as we saw earlier, this entire little section here. So if we just talk through it, we're going to go and grab the text of the item that is under edit. We're going to grab the message again, and then we are going to simply replace all of the break lines from this text and replace them with new lines. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, because this is all HTML. So when we see something like this, as we've seen before, if I just go and grab a state, let's go and do chat messages, and let's do one like that. You can see here, we're actually on our client model just storing all of these break lines, because that's the way that we need to do it in order to render out this white space. But when I hit, sorry, that's not my user. When I hit edit here, we want to maintain this white space inside of the text area, but that's not going to work if that's a break line, because a break line will actually be rendered out in the text area as just a BR tag, or like it's just going to be a BR. So that's why we are replacing all of these dynamically when we want to open this text area. So when I open this edit mode, we just replace these break lines with new lines, and then that's going to work just fine. And then we go through all of these new lines, and then we call create new row with the edit message height. And basically create new row is just going to try to fire the logic that increases the height of the text area up to a certain threshold. It's the same logic that we use for the message area down here. It's just that now we have two different variables, so I had to generalize that a little bit, and we'll walk through that in just a moment. Finally, we create the element, and then we do the same thing as earlier. We simply replace the child with, sorry, my throat is a little bit sore here. And we replace the element, and then we grab the text area of this new element, because remember, like we start with, I'll just close this window. We start with a text area like this. Or rather, we initialize it, and we have switched out this text for this text area, and then basically we want to grab that text area again, and then we want to focus on that, because when, as you can see here, my cursor is actually inside of the text area, so I want to just inject the text area into the DOM, grab it again, when it's in the DOM, and then focus that area. And then I do set selection range, which is basically just going to force my cursor to select a range of things in this element. And I set that to length. So the min is length and the max is length of the text area, which is just going to force my cursor to be at the end of the text within the text area. Cool. Then we have edit message itself, where this is just a function that fires whenever I type into my little message box here, and that's basically it really. So we check the key codes just as we do for just creating a new message, and we check if it's the return type and not the shift key is held. In other words, I just hit my return key. If I do, I'm just going to fire, as you saw earlier, save update message, which we already walked through all that logic. And then if it is the return key, we are simply going to create a new row. So just hitting, basically if I hold the shift key and then there's a return key, I'm just gonna create new rows like, well, this thing here basically. So that's about it. And then, and then the same logic applies here. So if we don't have anything inside of our element here, we are simply going to reset this edit message height variable to 0, so that it, as you could see here, if I have 2 lines like that and I go back and I try to remove everything, it goes back to the original height of the element. And delete message is, as you saw earlier, it's not supported just yet. If we hit delete message, it's just going to show that box there, but we're going to look at that next. And then we have a few small changes here to post message. As you saw earlier, like send message originally just took one event, but now it takes the event and the type of socket event we want to send and the variable to be updated. And the same thing goes for create new row. It just, because as remember, originally all we had was message height. That was the variable that we were editing, but changing when we were creating new rows with this logic. But now we need to make that a variable because it can be both message height and edit message height. So now it's just going to take in that value, and it's the same logic. It's just that it uses a different variable name. And send message is very much the same thing. As you can see here, originally we just did this thing here. We sent a message, which is just going to be it's basically an emit of the type message with the value that we send over the socket. But now we want to emit with the event name, so it can be both message and update message, because we can do an update and we can send a new message. And that's about it really, and then it's pretty much the same logic here, as you can see. I made a few changes to my thread component here as well, which isn't all that relevant for this specific feature. It's me just doing a little bit of Boy Scouting. Instead of using the same reference to my thread component all the time, I just made it so that I actually update. When I actually want to open a thread, I create a new thread component and put that on the window, and then I create an element and I send that and I open the action bar. It's just a little bit of house cleaning because I want to create a component, render it into the element when it's visible to the user, and I want to remove that and destroy it if the user, or rather whenever there's a new one. I want to I want to recreate the state every time because I don't want my component to be stateful. This will be more important later, but I just came across it now and I did it anyway. So close message menu is pretty simple. All message menu is going to, when we click close, basically all it's going to do is that it's going to remove this entire element from the state, because I put my message menu on the state. And then finally here we have open more actions, which is going to be quite, basically this is this part here. So when I click this, we're going to create this little menu here. And what's going to happen now is that we are going to get the dimensions, or get bound in client rect, from the target, which is going to be that little button that we click here, this button here. And then we're going to get the X and the Y, or like the positioning of this target, of this button. Then we're going to get the username from the current user, or like we're simply going to grab the current message, or the message that we clicked, the key of that, and then we're going to grab the username from that, so we have the username. And then we are simply going to go and get the username from the current user, or the user that we have. Like, we're simply going to check whether or not, like, if I click this, we're going to grab the username of the user who made this message and my current user, which is going to be foo, and then we render out something. But if I click here, then the username is bar and my username is foo, and I shouldn't allow foo to update anything for bar. I hope that makes sense. So that's where render elements comes in. It's just going to answer that question. And then we create the message menu, the component. We create the node, and then we simply set this on the state and as a message menu, the message menu component, and then we set the key, which is just going to be like the key that we passed in to open more actions, which is, you know, just this, the position of this this message within the list of elements. And then we append the child to, well, to the body. The reason why we want to do that is because, if you've noticed, this is actually blocking me from doing any interactions on the page. I can't hover. If I click, I'll see I can do it again. Let's try that again with the inspector, so that makes maybe more sense. I click here, and if I now look, we will see that my body has this little element here. So I've appended this element. I can remove it, and then I can click again, and then I append it again. And this is now covering my entire screen. Like, I cannot interact with anything until without clicking the specific element. I can click this part here because it's a child component of this element. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want this to cover everything, so that we actually have to make a selection. This is basically just a, even though it is a little tooltip, basically what it is a modal, and a modal's interaction behavior is expected to be, all right, you covered all of the things, like this is now on top of everything else, and if I edit something, then I shouldn't remove this, but I should also, on click outside or clicking outside of this, actually remove that element. And that's why I need this to cover the whole screen, to capture that click. So that I have this thing, I have this div that covers the entire background, so that when I actually try to, the user tries to remove this, I can click anywhere outside of this little tooltip here, and it's going to fire the event. So it's just a click capture, so that I can know when to close my message. So that's basically it. That's why we append it to the body, and then we query select for the message menu. Like, we just grab the menu here, and then we get the menu dimensions. So after because we need to add the menu, this little box here, into the DOM first, so that it actually, the browser knows, gives it a dimension values, so that we can get the bounding client rect of this, or the dimensions of this menu. And then we simply set the x, like the x position of this element, or of my little tooltip there, to be the x position of my button minus the width of my menu, like the total width, and then the y is going to be exactly the same. And then we simply set the top and the left for my menu, so that it gets the correct position. So wherever I am, I can always count on that clicking that is going to put this menu there. Clicking that is going to put this menu there. You see, like, it's basically just figuring out where to position this little box here. And that's all this logic is doing. And then, yeah, just a small refactor here on setting my children. Nothing super major there. And then we have the final piece of the logic here, which is just going to be, okay, so there's an incoming update message. In other words, somebody is now sent an update that should be reflected in my UI. All right, so what we're going to do is that we are going to grab the message that has the incoming message ID. We're going to loop through all of our messages, and we're going to just extract the ID, and then we're going to grab the index of this message, and then we're going to create a new list element, or a new list item. So we are going to set the message and the index, and then we're going to grab the parent node of this message, like this element, and we're simply going to replace it. And that's the whole logic right there. So that's why, as you see, like, every time somebody updates something on one side, and it cascades over to the other side of, like, the clients, and it updates in real time. Right, that was a lot of information. Hopefully you could follow along. So apart from that, we made a small change to the message model, or the client-side message model, because now a message needs to actually know its own ID as well. Here is, well, I'm not going to touch too much on the CSS, I'll just scroll through it. So if you find it, if you want to look at it, you can absolutely look at it, but we're not going to touch too much on that. Here is some new boilerplate, incoming update message and update message. As we saw earlier, we've just created these new actions and added them into our actions. And the same goes for events, so here are our new events. And here is our chat reducer, which is going to handle updates, for example. So update message, all it's going to do is that it's going to loop through all of the messages, or map through all the messages, and it's going to check if the message that we are looping through, is that equal to this new updated message, if these IDs are equal. If, in other words, we found the message we want to update, then we're simply going to return the value of this action, which is going to be the new message, instead of returning the message. Otherwise, we're simply returning the message. So basically, if this is the message we want to update, return the new message. Otherwise, just return the one that is already there. And then I did a few small things here because I wanted to use the message constant here, and in order to do that I needed to just create a closure, well, create a scope, a block between for these cases, because these two variables were colliding, so I figured I'd just do the thing that is fairly good practice to do when you have multi-line cases, which is just to wrap them in a block. Anywho, we've already touched on edit text, and we've already talked about message menu. A small thing happened here, like we added new color in the global variables, and this new variable here, as we saw earlier. So message height holds the height of the message text area when we create a new message, and this holds the height for when we edit a message, like the text area's height there. And then our chat API has this new update message method we saw earlier, where we just take in the message ID and the text, and we're going to create a put request where the text is the content of the body. And yeah, that's about it really, nothing fancy going on there. And finally, we have the message route on the server where, alright, so we are simply going to grab the message ID from the parameters and the user ID from the session and the text from the body, as we saw that we send the text in the body. And then finally, we call update message with user ID, message ID, and text, which is going to update that message with the new text, and then we get back the view and we simply send back the view. And this is the entire feature. So we can call this pretty much done now. Edit message is done, and in the next video we are going to look at removing a message.